I hope we have the first participant already. At least we can see her online right now. She has registered, and it's Professor Alessandra Fon Burg. She is from the United States of America. She is the professor at the University of Pittsburgh, associate professor, and director of graduate studies in the Department of Communication at Uwaik Forest University. Professor Fon Burg, hello, wonderful.
Good. So, thank you so much for organizing this conference, and hello from North Carolina.
Hello, very happy to see you.
Thank you, everybody. It's an honor to join you, especially being the first one.
Yes, you are the first one today.
So I have a website, and I sent it. I don't know if people want to follow along as I speak. That has some visual aids. I'm not sure about. I can share my screen, I think, but however works best for the.
Let's do it this way. You're going to talk, we will listen to you, and then we will post all the references online on your personal page, so people will be able to ask questions if they have. And so let's do that.
I'm going to also share, since it's a website, I am going to put it right here, so just in case people see it. But no worries. So I'm going to go ahead and start speaking. Is that okay?
Yes, we can hear it perfectly. So let's start. I want to say that the topic of your report is citizenship, deserts, refugees, and digital nomads. So now you go ahead, and we are very attentively listening to you.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to be talking about what I call citizenship deserts, which is what I call non-places for abandoned citizens. And I'm going to explain a little bit of what those words mean, but what I'm really talking about is, of course, is the refugee crisis. So as we see Syrian, Afghan, Iraqi, Somali refugees, and many others risk their lives to reach Greece. And of course, it's not just a European problem, but we have the Rohingya Muslims across the Bay of Bengal. And we also look at global warming patterns, and we hear more and more about environmental refugees. I talk about what I call the citizenship deserts as a way of thinking about the relationship between citizens and non-citizens, and how the relationship and what is happening between the two is not just an issue for scholars of communication, social media, digital nomadism, but really a political and social matter that might give us a glimpse into the future in terms of what we're all becoming. So I'm not going to talk too much about what a non-citizen is and what a citizen is. So I'm not going to talk too much about what a citizen is. A non-citizen is usually somebody who does not have the rights and benefits and the privileges associated with a nation that backs her up. So that's the biggest difference. But what I do stress, just to kind of, because especially since we're talking about nomadism, is the idea that non-citizens are really based, or the definition of non-citizen I use is based on two very important principles. One is the freedom of movement, which we already heard about as so important to nomadism, which is also related to the UN Declaration of Human Rights, Article 13, but also the duty of hospitality, which is actually Article 14. So the idea that we're free to move, but then somebody has to host us. And that changes a little bit in the digital world, and I'll get to that. But I also kind of think about non-citizen, especially refugees, and this idea of wander, moving around. I encourage us to look back etymologically some of the roots of this, and I'm not going to go in depth in all of them, but they're really related to this idea of escaping, flying, moving away, sometimes even just being pushed away from a place. So the concept of non-citizenship is also very much related to the idea of exile, so the idea of moving away from a home. And again, every time you're moving away, you also have to be hosted by somebody. So when I think about non-citizens, I encourage the listeners to think about the refugee crisis happening now and all the examples I have on the map that I've created, about the fact that when we think about Syrian refugees, we think about the stories that we see digitally, that some of you might follow Twitter accounts or Facebook stories or anywhere where you see this post. You really think of non-citizen in two ways. One is the dependent non-citizen, and the other one is the hyper non-citizen. So the stories are usually about how organization and institutions such as the
We have problems with connection. Yes, probably we should write to Professor Fon Burg right now. We'll try to reload and we'll try to reboot.
So the idea of citizenship deserts, I'm going to get to the digital part just in case I go out again, is that the way we abandon citizens, you know, now with the refugee stories is showing how there are some key features of what I call deserts, using the metaphors from many philosophers, many people who have written about this before. So this idea of abandonment and what's happening in the refugee camps right now shows us that there's a presence of like a real presence, a real focus on the here and now. What's happening with refugees. So the concept of time becomes very much about the here and now. So the refugees don't have a past. They really, sometimes, you know, we talk about it as if they don't have a future. So the moment is, the focus is on the moment here and now, like what their story, what's happening. Think of it as a Snapchat, you know, something that's happening in the present time. The focus is also on their presence, not just in terms of time, but in terms of corporeality, like coming from the body. They're like right here. So their physical presence becomes really interesting digitally because, again, there's that immediacy in terms of like the presence that we might have them not only when we control bodies. So this idea that I argue is relevant to citizenship deserts in the state of abandonment. We usually control bodies. Think of prisons. Think of places where, you know, even airports in a less dramatic way, like, you know, there's controlment of movement. So freedom of movement, you have control bodies. And the digital world becomes important because those bodies then become apparent, become real in terms of the way we see them. Now, the third feature is also related to the idea of role reversal. So not only it's about time and not only it's about presence, but it's the fact that we start in citizenship deserts, the ability to think of refugees as anything other than refugees. So this ability to see themselves or see ourselves and anything else. So the idea of imagination, idea of role reversal, thinking of something other than it is now, it becomes really hard. Again, the digital world helps us, or, you know, prevents us from thinking of anything other than the images that we see. So think about when you see a refugee, you don't really think about her as the doctor she used to be in Syria or the teacher and anything else, but you just see them in that. So that ability to see them other than what they are now becomes really tricky. So these three key features become important then for not only this idea of refugees in a desert, but in a digital desert. So the metaphor of nomadism becomes really important because I argue that the stories that we see now exist specifically in the digital world. You know, think about how many of us would not be able, just like we're connecting now, to connect to the stories of refugees were it not for their presence, not just in the news, but in the many formal and informal ways we connect them digitally. So their stories are just as powerful as they are in these very online digital presence. So this nomadism that it's real for them in terms of movement, physical, becomes a digital movement too. Now, the other part that becomes really important in terms of digital nomads is that technology is key to monitoring the refugees and also providing aid. So there are many examples, and some of them on my website, about agencies that actually use technology and the digital presence to monitor their movement and to provide aid. And this becomes key because when you have so much movement, the control of the movement that I mentioned earlier becomes really hard. Can you hear me? I see puzzle looks. Can you hear me? Okay. And then the last thing I would say, yeah, I can't hear.
We are listening to you, and we have the audience here. You can see them, but we have quite a lot of people here. So yes, we are all here. Okay. Yeah.
And so the last I would say about the digital presence is that the technology and the real kind of digital presence that they have, it also allows them to become, going back to the corporeality, becomes more real in terms of a sense of normalcy. So one of the many stories you hear about refugees is asking them like what they have with them, what do they bring when you have no sense of home, when you have to leave everything behind, what do you bring? And one of the things that often is mentioned is phones, or that mobiles, something that allows them to connect to the other back at home, back with others. GPS systems are very key when you're walking through Europe sometimes, or in the middle of the sea. So it's both a sense of normalcy and a sense of safety, and something that becomes so central to their physical presence as they're connected digitally. Now, the last thing I would say about why this all matters in terms of the citizenship desert metaphor and how this is particularly important for digital nomads is that what I push to think about as we're watching the refugee crisis, as we learn about non-citizen, as we think about our role as citizens, is theorizing non-placeness. So we've done so much to think about how a sense of place and connection to somewhere physical usually makes us who we are. The refugee crisis and what I call citizenship deserts are really teaching us how not being somewhere makes us who we are. So this idea of thinking not of just a place physically or even digitally, but how then we have to really let go of our traditional understanding of citizenship tied to nationality, tied to a place, tied to language, all those things are more kind of the traditional ways. And we have to, in a way, reimagine completely. So it is very much a digital task, but also a philosophical one, a political one, to really think about how non-placeness that defines us, who we are. So the two alternatives I always end for my work is, one could be, hey, let's forget it. Let's just close all the camps. Let's not make them deserts. Let's send everybody home, solve this crisis, which of course is a horrible one, by just having everybody find a sense of home. Let's just go home, right, the way we're used to. The alternative, the second alternative is to think about how the refugee crisis and what's happening now in citizenship desert is really a glimpse into the future for all of us. And so what we should be thinking about is a lesson in non-placeness, in not being somewhere, whether it's physically, digitally, the connectivity to others, how it comes about in very different ways that are much more about communication and about relations with others that are not the traditional ways of citizenship. So I'll end right there, and I apologize for all the parts that I've cut out because of all the technical difficulties, but I'm hopeful that the gist of the arguments are there.
It's part of fun to have these disconnections and to say, hey, we can hear you now.
We can see you right now, so it's part of everything. So we want to thank you, and I hope you will hear the audience right now. We don't see everybody. If someone has a question, probably, because I have a question, and we still have time, so I'm going to ask you the following. Usually when we talk about digital nomads, it's kind of free choice for people to choose this way of life, to choose this lifestyle, and the main characteristics are mobility, connectivity to the web, of course, connection to the web, and their professional opportunity to work and to entertain, to rest, to do everything online. But for the refugees, it's not a free choice. So how do you define how you, what is the definition of this term, refugee as a digital nomad? How can you, explain this term?
So yes, and I appreciate that, because even in the introduction and the welcoming remarks is very much about, digital nomads more as, young professional who might be connected in so many ways. I do think that the same characteristic related to mobility are still there, even for the refugees, although it's very, very different than like a student who, decides to study somewhere else, a professional who gets up and, for a business trip. But the mobility element, so this feature of being able to move is really important. The agency is very different. You say the freedom of movement as you pick up to go to work somewhere versus being forced to flee your country because of war or because of something that it's beyond you. So this is a huge difference. what I'm connecting the two is that they're both about mobility, and they're both about this idea that the defining characteristic of mobility becomes central to both. Now, the big difference is the lack of choice. This idea again of agency, and that's why one of my features that I talked about real quickly was this idea of the inability to think of role reversal, to imagine yourself as other than how you are now. So that's something that I think is really important, so that my larger arguments are that we don't abandon the refugees, so we don't leave them in citizenship desert. We don't think of them as just another kind of great discussion of movement and just move on. That is the key feature why, as we use technology and we use digital, we embrace these places, digital nomads, we also take the responsibility for those who might not have freedom of movement. So that's where the key feature that I mentioned earlier about the responsibility to host becomes important in defining then who has the freedom to engage in movement. Does that address your question?
Thank you very much. Yes, it was a very good answer. Maybe someone has a question still? No, still. Well, then please follow us online, of course. We will post your report online, and thank you very much again. And as I said, when you were not connected to us, our department also do some research in the area of migration and migrants as users of the internet and social networks. So probably in the future we could somehow join our research areas and do something together.
And there's great research showing how that's really important right now. So it's keeping lots of refugees connected.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Fon Burg. It was very nice that you found time and that you were so, you were so responsible to come here on time. It was very nice to see you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but it was a pleasure meeting all of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.